And now, as the world's clamoring for energy transition is, coming to a peak, reaching a peak right now, the federal government in Nigeria is also saying it would leverage on its resources to establish and expand electric vehicles, So it's quite astonishing because the resources we have, we want to see how that is going to be possible. Chinnan Dikwal, energy expert and vice chair of the African Energy Council, joins me this afternoon to discuss this. Good afternoon, Chinnan. It's good to have you back on the show.
Pleasure to be here.
So you're saying, the federal government's plan to, they just recently acquired this locally assembled electric vehicles from the pilot project. What specific policies and strategies are being put in place to encourage the mass production and possibly the adoption of electric vehicles in Nigeria?
Well, first of all, I'd say it's a very smart move on the part of the federal government. So what we're seeing here is Jet Motors, based out of Nigeria, have set up some sort of an assembly plant, and they're putting together, EVs in there, demonstrating. The federal government, of course, has gone in and has signed an MOU with Jet Motors to commercialize. So a really powerful move. Now, to your question, what's required to get this off the ground? A couple of things. So there are already actually steps to make this happen. There's a bill, an automotive bill, that sat in front of the Nigerian Senate today. That bill itself has a couple of fiscal, so financial and non-financial incentives and parameters, which is what's needed to birth an industry sector like this. So things like land, for instance, is required, for setting up such a plant, tax breaks, lots of funding and incentives and breaks. So all of these are the basic stuff that's required to incubate a very nascent sector as electric vehicles. And we've seen some of that already, some of those moves in other traditional sectors. And I'm beyond convinced the federal government can move that into EVs.
And so how does Nigeria plan to leverage its renewable energy resources to achieve this?
That's a fantastic question. So a couple of things. One, if we step back maybe a couple of months ago, 6 months ago, Nigeria found huge deposits of lithium. Lithium is one of the components that's needed to make batteries for electric vehicles. So Nigeria found that around the north, somewhere around Zamfara State, if I remember correctly. Now, with that sort of resource that's found, it gives Nigeria a competitive advantage in the race towards making batteries and EVs. So what the government needs to do, and I think it's doing already actually, is nationalizing such a resource and making sure effectively that any mining that happens around lithium that the federal government is doing has to be in association with all of the supply chain. So it is not simply a case of mine straight at the back of a truck and ship to China or ship into Europe, but it's a case where you mine it here, you polish the lithium here, you refine it here, all down to the grade of an electric vehicle. So I think things like that are starting to happen. Now, just to put this out actually, when Nigeria announced that they found lithium, Tesla was very quick to come and say, can we sign a deal? And one of the conditions that the federal government gave was to say, no, we won't, except if you would set up a battery plant in Nigeria.
So do we have issues of intellectual property here in terms of how do we take ownership of this? We're looking at getting truly indigenous and possibly, let's say, look at the uniqueness of our environmental conditions. How is Nigeria going to be able to handle this?
You're 100% right. Well, this is a game. So if you talk about IP, intellectual property, in this regard, the electric vehicle game has been going on for a long time. Nigeria is a late entrant into this. So whether we like it or not, the whole game will be played via leasing. We'd have to lease lots of licenses, with regards to electric vehicles. And there's no problem in that at all. What this would require would be signing very clever partnerships, maybe a Tesla, like already seeing there, maybe a NIO from China, maybe BYD, signing clever partnerships so that we can use some of the licenses that already exist and allows us to open up the supply chains in a very big way. But without a doubt, Nigeria needs to start to think very quickly around how do you even make the infrastructure for these EVs to happen? Because you think about it today, most of us drive petrol cars and petrol stations all around the place. If you bring the EV, it's not simply about the car, it's also the infrastructure investment that's required to get that going. So that infrastructure investment needs to be happening in tandem to getting the vehicles as we try to purchase them.
Okay, thank you so much, Chinnan Dikwal, Vice Chair, African Energy Council, for sharing your insights. Sorry, it seems to be rushing you, but we're out of time. Thank you for this insightful perspective.
Pleasure. Thank you.